three people have asked about purgatory and if that's still something that the church believes in, and yes, it does. Based on the Council of Trent and the Council of Florence, both councils describe this doctrine. Now, we have medieval concepts of that by virtue of Dante's Inferno and some other medieval depictions of purgatory. So when we were very young, and anybody that's younger than 50 years old probably wouldn't even be aware of this, but when we were very young, they would talk about purification by fire. And so the images were of actually being in a fiery kind of place. But we remembered always that heaven was something that we would eventually arrive at. The idea was that after death, we may not have completely opened ourselves up to the love of God or completely let go of what are called the temporal punishments due to sin. And those are the things that we usually cling to here on earth, or we even cling to our own guilt, and therefore that had to be purified. So that's the idea behind purgatory. Now, there were two passages that they would cite from scriptures. One was 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 15, and the other was 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 7, both of which talk about a purification by fire. But it's ambiguous because in the context itself, it would seem to be referring to an ongoing conversion in this life. But still, there was a question about the possibility if a person had not been completely open to the grace and the love of God when they die, then there had to be that possibility after their death of opening themselves up fully to the grace and the love of God. But it's also based on 2 Maccabees chapter 12, verse 46, where Maccabees talks about praying for those that had died in battle. And so why would you do that? He talks about atoning for their sins. And because of that, then the church also based its doctrine of purgatory on our belief in praying for those that had died. So it's really based upon those scriptural passages. But it's also something that makes some common sense. When you think about this, not everybody at the time of death is completely and fully open to God's grace and to His love. And sometimes we tend to cling to the things of this earth, or once again, we tend to cling to the things that we are guilty or ashamed of. And even though we recognize that God has forgiven us for them, they still bother us. They're still with us. So after death, we can think about a purification of our lives in such a way that in order for us to be totally open to the love and the mercy of God, we may have to let go of some things in our lives that keep us from being open to that. The fullness of holiness, or the fullness of saintness, is the recognition of that deep and abiding love and mercy that God has for us, and that we are able to open our arms to the beloved arms of the Lord, who embraces us into eternal life. One of the things that helps me to understand purgation is a passage in Paul where he speaks of how every single one of us will have to give an account of ourselves before God. So that accounting of ourselves has to include our whole history. And our history involves much goodness and charity and service towards others, but it also involves sin. And sin has a ripple effect. It touches the lives of other people in ways that sometimes we don't even understand. And our sin can touch the life of one person that touches the life of another person too. So it's coming to a realization of that. And as we come to a realization of that, that's going to be difficult for us maybe to accept. It might hurt us in a way in the presence of God, so that we have to come and be reconciled with those kinds of actions that have had that ripple effect in our life. So we recognize the absolute gracious forgiveness and mercy of God that touches us at every part of our very being, that purifies us in such a way that we are able to accept the loving embrace and the loving mercy of God in a perfect way, which ultimately is what sainthood is all about.